Imagine you're sitting in a cozy living room late at night, the glow of a soft lamp illuminating a table cluttered with old photographs, letters, and maybe a few medals glinting under the warm light. Outside, the wind rustles the leaves, and there's a certain hush in the air that feels almost reverent. Tonight, I want to share with you a story, one that resonates with valor, camaraderie, heartbreak, and above all, a fearless spirit that refused to be broken. It's the story of William Wild Bill Guarnere, a paratrooper who served with Easy Company of the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, part of the legendary 101st Airborne Division during the Second World War. But don't expect a dry recounting of dates and facts. Tonight, I want to spin this tale so vividly that you can practically feel the tension of war in the air, taste the grit of determination, and sense the personal struggles of a man who refused to quit, even when the odds were stacked monumentally against him. Let me take you back to South Philadelphia in the 1920s, to a bustling neighborhood alive with the sounds of street vendors calling out their wares, children playing stickball in the alleys, and the hum of factory whistles echoing in the distance. The folks who lived there were tough, practical, and devoted to their families. Immigrants of all backgrounds made their lives in row houses crammed with large families who got by on grit and resilience. There, on April 28, 1923, William Guarnere, better known later by his legendary nickname Wild Bill, was born. He was the baby of Joseph and Augusta Guarnere's brood, the youngest in a family of 10 children. Imagine him as a scrappy, energetic boy running along the sidewalks of Philly, his eyes glittering with mischief and curiosity. He had a spark, even as a kid, that hinted at the fearless soldier he would one day become. Growing up during the Great Depression, William saw firsthand how tough life could be. Factories closed, jobs dried up, and people scrabbled for a chance to put food on the table. For a spirited boy with a thirst for excitement and a deep sense of duty, the United States Army seemed like both salvation and adventure. Here was a chance to serve his country, to gain steady pay, and to be part of something bigger than himself. Even before the outbreak of war, he was drawn to the military, attending programs like the Citizens Military Training Camp, which gave young men a taste of Army life. He was so bent on joining that, legend has it, he convinced his own mother to fib about his age just so he could get in a couple of years early. If that doesn't capture the gutsy flair of the boy who would become Wild Bill, I'm not sure what does. This was a time when the winds of war were already whispering across the Atlantic. In Europe, conflict brewed, and alliances were shifting. In the U.S., the mood was tense yet uncertain. The average American tried to rebuild a life after the economic devastation of the Depression, but the looming threat overseas sent shivers through every small town, big city, and farm in the nation. William, brimming with ambition to become an officer, enrolled in a 4-year training program that was meant to open those doors for him. Fate, however, had other plans. As Europe plunged deeper into violence and rumors of America's inevitable involvement swirled, that tidy path to becoming an officer was cut short. Instead of 4 years, the training condensed dramatically. Suddenly, everything was happening fast. Too fast for some, but not for William, who thrived on challenge. The attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941 changed everything. The news rattled the nation to its core, and people woke up on December 8th as though to a new reality. The United States was now at war. For William, who was only a half year shy of finishing high school, that call to arms became irresistible. With an unquenchable drive to do his part, he quit school and took a job at Baldwin Locomotive Works, helping to build tanks for the Army. Each tank that rolled off the line might soon see action in Europe or the Pacific, and in William's mind, He was helping shape the arsenal of democracy. Not long afterward, the army came calling, and William enlisted, ready to turn his restless energy and nascent skills into real battlefield heroics. He found himself assigned to the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, a newly formed unit that would become a legend in its own right. At Camp Toccoa, in the rolling hills of Georgia, he met the men who would become his second family, fellow paratroopers, many of them fresh-faced and bright-eyed, unaware of the horrors of war that lay ahead. For William, this was training camp, but it was also a crucible. Day after day, they ran up and down Currahee Mountain in punishing 6-mile round trips under scorching sun and heavy packs, pushing themselves to the brink of exhaustion. Only the toughest, most determined, and downright stubborn men were going to earn those paratrooper wings. William thrived in this environment. He was quick, agile, and possessed a certain wild streak that seemed to invigorate him more than tire him out. He was never short on confidence or the willingness to take a dare. By the time these men completed their training and were shipped off to England, the world had grown unrecognizable from just a few years prior. Cities across Europe smoldered in ruins. The Axis powers seemed unstoppable on their path to domination. But the Allies planned a massive retaliation, an invasion of continental Europe to break Hitler's hold once and for all. Operation Overlord, often simply called D-Day, was taking shape. Easy Company Williams' outfit would be right in the thick of it, parachuting into Normandy behind enemy lines in the dead of night. It was a mission fraught with danger, but for William, it was a chance to strike a blow for his homeland and for his family. Yet fate intervened in a way that stung him to his core. Just as he was on the brink of shipping out for Normandy, word arrived that his older brother had been killed in action. The news was a knife through the heart. Grief can turn to many things in a soldier: quiet determination, crippling sorrow, or, in William's case, a furious need for vengeance. That sorrow and rage fueled him. In the chaos of war, he had a personal vendetta to avenge his brother's death and ensure that no more of his loved ones would have to endure that kind of loss. It was from this smoldering grief that Wild Bill truly emerged. He became notorious among his fellow paratroopers for his ferocity in battle and an almost reckless willingness to charge into danger. And charge he did. In June 1944, William leaped out of a plane into a sky lit by distant explosions and tracer fire. Parachutes billowed all around him. The earth below was a patchwork of fields, hedgerows, and roads lit intermittently by flames from the bombardment. If you can, imagine being 21 years old, your heart pounding, your limbs tingling with adrenaline, and the knowledge that once you land, everything is life or death. William and the men of Easy Company had a mission: secure key positions that would block German reinforcements from reaching the beaches where the main Allied forces would soon land. The men scattered across the countryside that night, many missing their drop zones by miles, but ultimately regrouping to hold critical ground. At one point, William's intense battle spirit flared with dramatic results. According to the stories, he and his fellow soldiers had set up an ambush in a small French village. They were waiting for orders when a German convoy appeared, trucks rumbling through, men in uniform, perhaps unsuspecting of the American paratroopers, hidden among the trees and hedgerows. In that tension-filled moment, William opened fire. Some might say it was impulsive or reckless. Others would call it the decisive action of a soldier determined not to let his comrades down. That was William Wild Bill Guarnere for you, hot-blooded, unstoppable, determined to do his job in the most direct way possible. Soon after Normandy, Easy Company found itself involved in Operation Market Garden. the massive Allied airborne mission aimed at seizing bridges in the Netherlands and opening a direct route into the heart of Germany. Though it was a grand plan, it was also fraught with complications. William and his comrades parachuted into the Netherlands, hearts thumping, ready to secure strategic crossings. But the German forces were stronger and more prepared than anticipated. The mission spiraled into chaos, and Allied units took heavy casualties. It was a sobering moment for a soldier like William, who had approached each operation with unwavering courage and faith in victory. During one of these engagements, William found himself alone on a borrowed motorcycle. Borrowed in this case meaning it likely belonged to a Dutch civilian. He was trying to catch up to his unit, racing through muddy roads under a gray sky. Suddenly, he was spotted by enemy forces and a bullet tore into his leg. Wounded and bleeding, he was sent back to England for treatment. Still, the restlessness that had fueled him since boyhood hadn't subsided. In the hospital, he fretted that he'd lose his spot in easy company if he stayed away too long. The very thought of being placed in another outfit made his stomach churn with dread. So he did what perhaps only Wild Bill Guarnere would do. He up and left the hospital against medical advice, risking court-martial just to return to his band of brothers. Indeed, the army wasn't exactly thrilled by this insubordination, and he was demoted, but William would rather be a private in easy company than a corporal or sergeant anywhere else. Although his impulsiveness nearly cost him dearly, the army bureaucracy moved slowly enough that his paperwork had yet to finalize by the time easy company needed him again, this time in the freezing forest of Belgium. It was December 1944, and the Battle of the Bulge loomed. Imagine thick, snow-blanketed woods and the enemy pressing in from multiple angles, determined to push the Allies back. Exhaustion, cold, and hunger were constant companions, as were the artillery shells shrieking overhead. The men of the 101st Airborne found themselves surrounded in Bastogne, short on supplies and lacking adequate winter gear. Still, they held. William threw himself into the fray with the same unstoppable fury that had come to define him. Then the unthinkable happened. While attempting to save his dear friend Joe Toy, William was hit again, and this time the injury was catastrophic. The bullet tore through his right leg with such force that doctors had no choice but to amputate. In an instant, the unstoppable Wild Bill was pulled from the fight. One can only imagine the swirl of emotions he felt: rage at the misfortune, heartbreak at leaving his unit, and relief that he was still alive, though forever changed. Returning stateside in March 1945, William faced the daunting task of starting anew. The war had ended for him personally, though it still raged on in Europe for a few more months, and in the Pacific until that summer. How does a man who has known so much adrenaline, risk, and camaraderie settle back into a normal life on a quiet Philadelphia street? He tried everything, odd jobs here and there, living off partial disability while waiting for more comprehensive benefits, wrestling with the challenge of navigating life on an artificial leg. He reportedly even threw away his prosthetic at some point, relying solely on crutches. Perhaps it was symbolic, a refusal to pretend everything was fine. He'd gone to war with 2 legs, but he'd come back with 1, and no amount of plastic or metal was going to make that feel the same. The Army eventually granted him full disability, but that was far from the end of his journey. In civilian life, William discovered new ways to serve and connect. He joined veterans organizations where he found others who had stories to tell and scars to show. He organized and attended countless reunions of Easy Company, acting as a driving force to keep the men together, to remember and honor their shared sacrifices. In a world that seemed to want to forget the war as quickly as possible, William believed it was vital to keep those memories alive, not just to reminisce, but to pay tribute to those who never came home. He also married his sweetheart, Frances, in a union that brought him a sense of stability. Together they had 2 sons, Eugene and William Jr. Perhaps it was a point of pride when Eugene followed in his dad's footsteps by enlisting for a short period during Vietnam. By all accounts, William was a dedicated family man, just as he had been a dedicated soldier, fiercely protective and ready to take on the world for those he loved. Over the years, grandchildren and then great-grandchildren came along, each new generation hearing stories about the unstoppable paratrooper who had once jumped into France and limped out of Belgium. As time passed, William also found another passion, telling the story of Easy Company. He collaborated with fellow veteran Edward Babe Heffron and writer Robin Post to pen brothers in Battle Best of Friends, a book that offered an intimate look into what it was really like to be part of Easy Company, from training through the horrors of war to the uneasy peace that followed. The book, released by Berkeley Publishing Group, Penguin Books, was more than just a historical account. It was a deeply personal narrative that showcased the tight bond shared by men who fought shoulder to shoulder. William also contributed an afterword to Silver Eagle, the biography of another Band of Brothers comrade, Clancy Lyle. His voice, honest, sometimes blunt, and often laced with humor, brought to life the spirit of a generation that faced down perhaps the greatest threat to freedom the world had ever known. Along the way, William's friendships within Easy Company endured. He served as best man for Babe Heffron when the latter got married in 1954, and he became godfather to Babe's daughter, Patricia. These bonds formed in the blood and mud of war transcended mere acquaintanceship. They were akin to family. Even in his final years, William Guarnere was a fixture at reunions, gatherings, and public events commemorating the exploits of the 101st Airborne. He was proud to represent those who had fallen, to speak their names aloud so they would never fade into the mists of history. On March 8, 2014, William Wild Bill Guarnere passed away from a ruptured aneurysm at the age of 90. For a man who had stared death in the face countless times during the war, it was a peaceful release by comparison. He left behind a legacy not just in the form of medals or commendations, Silver Star, Bronze Star, and Purple Heart among them, but in the stories that survived him. Stories told by his children, grandchildren, and his countless brothers from the war. Stories that would eventually be captured in books, documentaries, and recollections shared around bar tables at veterans' halls. Stories that we continue telling now in this very moment, so that the memory of Wild Bill Guarnere remains undimmed. There's something undeniably captivating about a man who simply would not yield. From fibbing about his age at 15 to resume training, to fleeing a hospital ward on crutches so that he could rejoin his unit, to organizing Easy Company reunions decades after the war, William personified a spirit of daring that few can match. Yet for all his bravado, he was still a man who experienced profound grief at losing a brother, who mourned his fallen comrades, and who lived the rest of his life on one leg, a permanent souvenir of his time in Europe. Each step he took was a testament to a cause he believed was worth every sacrifice. Now, if you close your eyes, you might see William in his final days, an elderly man, short on stature but large in presence, regaling young relatives with war stories that have become family lore. Maybe you'd see him holding court at a reunion, laughing with men who remember exactly how cold Bastogne was in December of 1944. Perhaps you'd see him in a quiet moment, staring at old photographs, medals lined up on a shelf, the bittersweet memories flickering in his gaze. This is the image of a life that roared with courage but also knew the cost of war. His story endures because it speaks not just to the events of World War II, but to universal human themes: loyalty, friendship, the hunger for justice, and the longing for home. It reminds us that even in the darkest of times, individuals can rise to extraordinary feats of bravery and, yes, impulsiveness that reshape the course of their lives and those around them. William Guarnere's name might be etched in the annals of Easy Company's history, but his legacy extends far beyond that specific chapter of World War II. His story is a testament to every soldier who refuses to yield, to every citizen who steps up when the world needs them, to every family that stands strong in the face of tragedy. As we reflect on his life, we do so not just to recall the man who was Wild Bill, but to appreciate the countless unsung heroes who share similar paths. William's life is part of a tapestry of bravery and sacrifice woven by millions of servicemen and women. Each thread, each story is vital, and each deserves to be told. That is how we honor them, how we keep the memory of their deeds alive for future generations. We owe it to them to remember, to pass these stories along like heirlooms of dignity and valor that must not be allowed to fade away. And yet there's a lighter side to William's story too, a swagger, a defiance. Picture that spirited lad telling his mother to claim he was older so he could sneak into military training, or that soldier commandeering a motorcycle in the Netherlands. He had a larger-than-life energy that's as entertaining as it is inspiring. People like William draw us in. They show us that duty and fun, determination and mischief can sometimes coexist. They remind us that not all heroes are stoic statues. Some crack jokes, push their luck, and roll their eyes at authority, even while risking their lives to save others. Let that thought linger as we circle back to the beginning, the living room, the lamp's glow, the quiet hush of nighttime. The old photographs on the table now have fuller meaning. The man in those black and white images with the cocked grin, wearing jump wings on his uniform, is no longer just a figure from the distant past. He is William Wild Bill Guarnere, a man who lived a life of extremes, who soared through the war on pure adrenaline and camaraderie, and who, when that chapter closed, found new ways to serve and inspire. He is that resolute face in the crowd at veterans' reunions, that unstoppable spirit who refused to be sidelined despite losing his leg, that unwavering voice in countless stories told around the dining room table to wide-eyed grandchildren. He is, and always will be, a symbol of what it means to give your all for something greater than yourself. If you found yourself drawn into his story, feeling the highs and lows, the heartbreak and the triumph, then I encourage you to keep that spark alive. Stories like William's are meant to ignite something within us, whether it's gratitude for the sacrifices made or determination to face our own challenges with a fraction of his courage. Let's ensure that the next generation hears this tale and that we honor these men by remembering not only what they did, but who they were. Now, as we reach the end of this journey, I'd like to ask you, yes, you, who've given your time to hear about William Wild Bill Guarnere, if his story has resonated with you, if it has taught you something about courage, resilience, or the unstoppable human spirit, then please consider helping to keep this legacy alive. Take a moment to click the like button, drop a comment about what inspired you the most, and subscribe so that we can continue sharing more extraordinary stories that might otherwise slip into the shadows of history. And if there's someone in your life, a parent, a grandparent, a friend, who you think would be moved by William's tale, share this video with them. That single action can ensure that Wild Bill Guarnere's memory continues to shine brightly for years to come, reminding us all that legends aren't born. They're forged in the fire of adversity, sustained by the bonds we share, and kept alive in the stories we pass on.